Up next, a woman goes missing, and her family thinks it's foul play.
Michelle wasn't going to take off and leave her kids, you know.
Investigators learn some of her friends have shady pasts.
He had been convicted of rape and attempted murder in Arizona.
But without a body, police have no solid clues until a suspect makes a tiny mistake.
They had gotten a call that they may have possibly found a body or something near his property. And he says, that's not possible. Well, wait a minute. What do you mean that's not possible?
On a cool September morning, in the small town of Owego in upstate New York, Cal Harris woke early, as he usually did, to help get his 2 children ready for school and get to work. Harris owned several large car dealerships in town. But on this morning, he discovered his wife hadn't returned home from her waitressing job the night before. That wasn't entirely surprising. The 2 were leading separate lives and were planning a divorce.
She was only staying at the house for the children, sleeping in the couch in the living room.
Cal told police Michelle sometimes went out after work, but staying out all night was unusual.
Michelle was home every night, you know, wanted to see the kids before they went to school in the morning, so we were all very alarmed.
Michelle's van was found a half-mile from the house, along a driveway on their huge estate. The keys were still in the ignition, but none of this necessarily indicated foul play.
He figured she met somebody at the end of the driveway to go drinking, left the van there and left with that person, and just hasn't come back yet.
We found no blood, no damage to the vehicle.
And police found nothing suspicious inside the home.
We could look wherever we wanted, and we checked every room of the house. We didn't notice anything out of line.
Troopers and search dogs, even scuba divers, searched the Harris' 250-acre property, which presented more than the usual challenges.
There's a large number of laid-up wells, so we brought in an underwater camera and searched all those wells as we were doing the organized searches in the woods.
They had helicopters, they had divers in the lake. Nothing. No clothing, no blood, no bones, no nothing. They found literally no trace of her outside of that house.
Police traced Michelle's whereabouts for the night before. Michelle worked at a local restaurant, and co-workers said she left when her shift ended at 9 p.m. But she didn't leave alone. She left with one of the cooks, Michael Hakes.
Police investigators, they interview Mr. Hakes. He tells them that he said goodbye to Michelle Harris that night in the parking lot, and that was the last time he ever saw her.
The surveillance tapes from the restaurant parking lot couldn't confirm this, but Hakes had an alibi. He said he left the restaurant and went directly to his girlfriend's house.
And we went back to her. Did Mr. Hakes ever ask you to make up an alibi for him or to lie to the police? She said no, that he came here after work that night. He stayed all night.
Hakes' girlfriend told police he arrived there around 9:45 p.m. But if Hakes left the restaurant at 9 p.m. and his girlfriend lived only 15 minutes away, there was a 30-minute period he couldn't account for. Then, a background check revealed a startling piece of information.
Michael Hakes had been convicted of rape and attempted murder in Arizona and served 10 years in Arizona State Prison for that. And he'd been out of prison for about 1 year as of that time.
Hakes' employers at the restaurant didn't know he was a registered sex offender, and apparently neither did Michelle Harris.
I don't know if she knew about his background, but we were convinced right away that something untoward had happened.
Police in upstate New York were baffled by the disappearance of Michelle Harris. All they knew was that she failed to return home from her waitressing job, and her abandoned car was discovered a half-mile from her home. Michelle left the restaurant with a co-worker, Michael Hakes, a convicted sex offender, although no one knew he had a felony conviction at the time. When analyzing Michelle's van, criminalists found 2 different sets of fingerprints on the driver's side door.
That's something of, great significance to a case.
The fingerprints did not match Michelle's co-worker, Michael Hakes. So police searched Michelle's cell phone records, and they revealed a man named Brian Early called Michelle on the night she disappeared.
He did call her on her cell phone that night, left a message for her, asking her to stop by his place.
Brian Early and Michelle Harris had been dating for the past year. He had recently moved from Philadelphia to upstate New York so he could be closer to Michelle.
She certainly saw a great deal of him, and they both had very strong feelings, and they were taking concrete steps to move forward.
When police questioned Brian, he admitted seeing Michelle the night she disappeared, but said she left his apartment around 11 p.m.
He says he walks her out to the car, kisses her goodnight, and she leaves in her van, and that's the last time he ever saw her.
And that, as far as anyone knows, is the last time she was seen alive.
Fingerprint technicians identified Brian Early's prints as the ones on Michelle's car door. But Brian Early said this was consistent with his story, that he leaned in through the window to kiss Michelle goodnight, and he insisted this took place in his apartment's parking lot. Although Brian was the last known person to see Michelle alive, police also had to consider the possibility Michelle's estranged husband was somehow involved. Michelle and Cal were going through a divorce, one that would be very costly to him.
Cal Harris owned 6 car dealerships. The car dealerships were very successful.
Cal made a settlement offer of $750,000, which was rejected. And shortly before Michelle's disappearance, the divorce court ordered an independent valuation of Cal's business. The valuation alone would cost him $30,000.
I think when he had gotten the certified letter of the $30,000 for the CPA, he was furious.
I've yet to hear of anyone getting divorced, male or female, that likes to give up a dime to the spouse that's leaving. That's never a happy prospect, no matter what your station in life.
Cal Harris also had a history. To his neighbors, it was hardly a secret.
We saw the side of him in his past relationships where there was incidents of domestic violence and controlling behavior.
So police asked Cal Harris, Michelle's boyfriend, Brian Early, and the cook at the restaurant, Michael Hakes, to take polygraph examinations. One of them refused. When police asked Michelle Harris's boyfriend, Brian Early, to take a polygraph test, he willingly complied.
He passed the exam. Anytime we needed him for DNA, fingerprints, additional questions, no problem.
The cook at the restaurant, Michael Hakes, a convicted sex offender, also took a polygraph examination. He, too, passed. But the lawyer for Michelle's estranged husband, Cal Harris, adamantly refused to allow him to take the polygraph, at least the one administered by the police.
We obtained a warrant and put a GPS on his vehicle, and he went to another part of the state and took a polygraph test. The private investigator that he hired took him out to that test.
Then Cal Harris said something unusual to investigators. It was something he said about Michelle's van.
He says, well, I've got to get it back to the dealer. I want to get it detailed and cleaned and put back on the lot.
In other words, Cal planned to sell Michelle's van as soon as possible.
It's just, wait a minute. Really? You know, it just didn't sit right.
Some of Michelle's friends told police that Cal had threatened Michelle in his anger over the upcoming divorce.
Cal said, you know, if I wanted to kill you, I don't need a gun to kill you. And if I do kill you, they'll never find you.
She was quite vocal in her abject terror of Calvin and what he would ultimately do to prevent their divorce.
Michelle told her family that the only reason she stayed in the house was that she'd lose custody of her children if she moved out.
Then they'd have got her for abandonment. The divorce judge, or the one that handled that, said that she had to stay there.
Michelle and Cal first met when Michelle got a job at one of Cal's car dealerships. They had been married for 11 years, and there were problems from the start.
He had cheated on her many times.
Amazingly, they all looked similar to Michelle. All petite blondes, very nice women, all of them.
And then he'd say, well, let's go to a marriage counselor. And so then she would show up at the marriage counselor, and he wouldn't show up.
Friends said Cal's need to control the relationship was all-consuming, and divorce didn't fit into that scheme.
On September 11th, many areas of Cal's life were out of his control. His wife was out of his control, the children were out of his control, and for a person of his temperament, we have to imagine that was pretty unbearable. And on September 12th, all those areas are back under his control.
Investigators had done a cursory search of the house the day Michelle went missing. Now, 3 days later, they sent in forensic examiners. Again, nothing seemed amiss until they stepped into the kitchen and saw what appeared to be tiny drops of blood on the wall.
The apparent blood stains that I saw were roughly 1 millimeter in size, and then there was on the one door molding, there was like an upside down U-shaped pattern that had a void in the center.
These U-shaped patterns are formed when water is mixed with blood, causing the edge of the stain to dry faster.
That was indicative of a potential cleanup.
The size of the blood stains that hadn't been cleaned was even more telling. This was medium velocity blood spatter, which results from an object striking a body more than once with extreme force.
With a beating or a kicking a type of death, you're going to see the medium velocity blood stain or impact spatter.
When investigators turned over a throw rug in the hallway next to the kitchen, they found even more blood.
Steve Anderson counted something like 78 or 80 different blood stains, and again, many of them were 1 millimeter or less in size.
It would be consistent with some sort of assaultive event having occurred in the kitchen area.
No weapon was discovered, but investigators found more evidence of a cleanup in the garage.
You had indications of a directional force having wiped the floor because you have blood pushed underneath one edge of the paint chips and not the others.
DNA testing showed it was Michelle's blood.
And we confirmed that with the use of a toothbrush to get Michelle Harris's known DNA profile.
This is starting to paint a picture of what could have happened to her.
Except an important piece of that picture was missing: the body of Michelle Harris. And without a body, taking this to trial would be a difficult decision.
Juries are so unpredictable, you don't know what they're going to do.
I guess human nature says, without a body, how do we know a crime was committed? How can you prove that beyond a reasonable doubt?
Blood spatter evidence indicated Michelle Harris had been attacked in her kitchen. Michelle's blood was also found on the garage floor. The amount was difficult to judge.
I cannot accurately provide you with an estimate of the original amount of blood that was there. We're dealing with what was left over.
The only question was, where was her body? Her estranged husband, Cal Harris, had a motive. Their upcoming divorce was going to be very costly to him, and he made numerous incriminating statements to friends.
He was at a family picnic after she had disappeared. They had gotten a call that they may have possibly found a body or something near his property. And he says, that's not possible. Well, wait a minute. What do you mean that's not possible?
As the search for Michelle's body continued, Cal went on with his life. Within days, he sold Michelle's clothes and kept seeing his girlfriend.
He asked that girlfriend to come to his house on the night of Michelle's birthday at the end of September. And she was afraid that Michelle was going to come home. And he said, don't worry, she's not coming home.
Investigators found no blood on or in any of the family's vehicles. Coincidentally, Cal had his truck washed at his car dealership the day Michelle went missing. But if Cal did it, how did he get Michelle's body out of the house?
He could have put her in a garbage bag or wrapped her in a blanket. Again, we don't know.
Although prosecutors arrested Cal Harris and charged him with Michelle's murder, they waited several years before bringing the case to trial. They feared the defense would argue that Michelle was still alive.
We wanted to take away that argument from the defense that, you know, for all we know, she's not even dead.
It was difficult for Michelle's family to deal with Cal while he was out on bail awaiting trial.
We'd get the grandkids for birthday parties and stuff, and he could never look you straight in the face, would never make eye contact with you or anything like that. It almost tells you he's involved with it somehow.
He hired fabulous attorneys, very competent attorneys.
My only thought was I hope they've got enough evidence, because there definitely will be the best law firm defending him.
Despite a lack of evidence, one fact was inescapable.
Cal was the one person that had something to gain from Michelle not being here.
Even without a body, prosecutors were convinced Michelle's spattered blood could prove she'd been killed.
Even if it's not the strongest case in the world, it deserves to be tried, and we owe it to her, we owe it to her family.
Prosecutors believe Cal was in the kitchen when he heard Michelle's van coming into the garage. And he may have been angry after learning the divorce court ordered an independent valuation of his business that would cost him $30,000. When Michelle walked inside, Cal attacked, hitting her at least twice with a blunt object, producing the blood spatter found on the kitchen floor. Blood spatter on the molding shows he hit her at least once more as she was on the ground. The evidence shows he carried Michelle into the garage where she bled onto the concrete floor. Prosecutors believe he placed her body into a plastic bag and then put her in the back of his truck and buried her somewhere on their huge property. Back at the house, he drove her van to the edge of the driveway over a half-mile away and left it there. Investigators think he wanted to get the van farther away, but didn't want to risk anyone seeing him walking home, which would be hard to explain. Once he got back in the kitchen, he tried to clean the blood, but there was simply too much.
The blood pointed to where the crime scene was, and the crime scene was in control of Cal Harris.
For somebody who wanted everything in order, he was the one who cleaned up that blood. He didn't do a good job of doing it.
When Cal Harris stood trial, he took the stand in his own defense.
When he couldn't make his testimony fit with the testimony of all the witnesses that had testified in the case, he basically accused them of being liars, that they lied about critical facts in the case just to fabricate a case against him.
The jury also learned The cell phone record showed Cal never called Michelle's cell phone on the morning she went missing.
Other times when she stayed out too late or she didn't come home, there'd be a volley of phone calls to her cell phone telling her to get home.
I'm more inclined to think that it was planned out, that he had thought about how he could do it, where he could do it, and where he would put the body.
Cal Harris was convicted of second-degree murder and was sentenced to 25 years to life in prison.
I don't know if they would have gone to trial without the blood, but after hearing everything that I heard, I don't know that the outcome would have been any different.
They keep wanting to change a venue. I think it could have been tried in Egypt, and with the amount of evidence that the state police had gathered and the way that Keene presented it, that they'd have found him guilty any place.
Sadly, Michelle's body has never been found.
We'll always look for her. We still receive teletypes. Michelle's DNA and dental records are entered into international databases. People still call in with tips and theories, and we talk to everybody. Psychics still call us with ideas. So the state police will always look into where Michelle Harris is.